Have you ever seen this woman? Her name was Ada Lovelace. Long before software was even a word, she was already wrestling with the idea behind all computing. How do you give a machine instructions? How do you make logic run automatically? She is often credited as the world's first computer programmer. By modern standards, Ada was the ultimate Nepo baby. Her father was Lord Byron, brilliant poet, celebrity, and chaos in human form. Her mother was Annabella Millbake, sharp, educated, disciplined, and intensely analytical. If Lord Byron ran on emotion and impulse, Lady Byron ran on structure and self-control. Byron even nicknamed her the Princess of Parallelograms. It sounds playful, but it hints at the clash between them. Byron was the romantic who glorified storms and emotion. Annabella believed the mind should be disciplined and controlled. They were brilliant in completely different directions, like 0 and 1. Their marriage didn't last. It collapsed under scandal, debt, and distrust. Within weeks of Ada's birth, Annabella left with a baby. Soon after, Byron left Britain for good. Behind the polite public story, Lady Byron's private letters suggested she feared Byron was becoming mentally unstable and that his behavior felt dangerous at home. Exactly what happened inside the household during those final weeks remains uncertain, and historians still debate how those letters should be interpreted today. That rupture shaped everything. Annabella feared Ada might inherit what people called Byron's dangerous temperament: volatility, recklessness, emotional extremes. So Lady Byron made a radical decision for early 19th century Britain. Ada would not be raised only for charm. She would not be trained just in the accomplishments expected of wealthy girls: music, etiquette, the art of looking effortless. Instead, Annabella pushed her towards mathematics and logic, almost like mental armor. And that's where the story collides with the reality of Ada's time. Because in the early 1800s, women in Britain weren't expected to study serious mathematics at all. Universities were not open to them, and the scientific world was overwhelmingly male. If a woman wanted advanced math, she usually had to learn privately, through tutors, books, and whatever doors her family could open. Ada had those doors, not because society offered them, because her mother forced them open. From early childhood, Ada was surrounded by tutors: algebra, geometry, proofs. Her education was strict, and it was unusual for a girl of her class. And here's the twist. Her mother, Annabella, wanted to remove poetry from Ada's life. It didn't work. Ada didn't lose her imagination. She redirected it. Around the age of 12, Ada became obsessed with flight. She studied birds and their wings like a scientist. She tested materials: paper, silk, feathers, trying to reason out what could lift weight into the air. And she imagined something wild: a steam-powered flying machine shaped like a horse with mechanical wings. She even named the project Flyology. It's an almost perfect preview of her future. She starts with a dream, then tries to turn it into something structured, something you can describe step by step. That's not just engineering. That's the mental habit of programming. Annabella tried to suppress the poet. What she created instead was a mind that fused imagination with logic. And that combination would later change the history of computing. But for that to happen, Ada needed more than talent. She needed a doorway into the scientific world. That doorway was another remarkable woman, Mary Somerville. Somerville was a serious scientific thinker and writer, famous enough to move into London's intellectual circles at a time when women's scientific work was treated as an exception. She translated and explained advanced ideas, and she became a living example that a woman could belong in that world. Ada met Somerville as a teenager, and it mattered. For the first time, Ada saw a woman who could sit among male scientists and not act like she was trespassing. Mary Somerville encouraged Ada's studies and brought her into scientific gatherings, saloons where ideas could circulate in living rooms, because the institutions didn't make space for everyone. And through that circle, Ada met Charles Babbage, who is often called the father of the computer. At one of these gatherings, Babbage demonstrated a strange brass device, part of his difference engine. It looked like a luxury clock that had decided to become a mathematician. Gears, wheels, columns of numbers. Guests leaned in, curious, slightly amused. But the goal was serious. The difference engine was designed to calculate mathematical tables automatically. Tables used for navigations, engineering, and finance, where a copied error could become a real-world disaster. Babbage wanted reliability. He wanted to take human fatigue out of the loop. Ada was entranced, not only by what the machine did, but what it implied. Because even while he was building the difference engine, Babbage had a bigger idea. In the mid-1830s, he began designing the analytical engine. This wasn't a calculator built for one task. It was designed to be general, a machine that could carry out different sequences of operation depending on the instruction you gave it. And the design reads like a blueprint from the future. There was a store where numbers and intermediate results could be held, a memory, a mill where operations would be performed, processing, and control through punched cards inspired by the Jacquard loom. So Babbage imagined a machine that separated memory, processing, and instructions, a programmable computer in everything but completion. The analytical engine was never fully built, but Ada didn't need a finished machine to understand the idea. When she studied Babbage's design, she wasn't focused on a single result. She cared about organization, how operations linked together, and how instructions could be structured into a sequence that machine could follow reliably. Between 1842 and 43, Ada translated a French article about the analytical engine by the Italian engineer Luigi Menabrea, and then she added her own notes that surpassed the original article in length and redefined the machine's potential. When the paper was published in 1843, she signed it only with her initials, AAL, and inside those notes, especially in Note G, Ada laid out a method for calculating Bernoulli numbers, a step-by-step procedure designed for the engine to execute. Today, we'd call it an algorithm. That's why she's often described as the first programmer. It's one of the earliest published examples of a program written for a general-purpose computing machine. There is a nuance, and it matters. Babbage had earlier unpublished sequences, and he and Ada worked closely. Historians debate how to assign credit line by line, but what isn't debated is the significance of Ada's notes. She explained programming as an idea. She didn't just show a calculation, she showed a new way to think. In her letters, Lovelace described her approach as poetical science, the fusion of imagination and mathematics. Imagination lets you ask, what if? Mathematics forces you to answer with structure. Ada believed you needed both, the creative leap and the disciplined method, the dream and the blueprint. That's why she could see something bigger than a faster calculator. She realized numbers could represent more than quantity. They could stand in for symbols, patterns, and relationships. And if a machine can manipulate numbers according to rules, it can also manipulate symbols according to rules. That's the jump from calculation to computation. She even compared the engine to weaving, saying it could weave algebraic patterns the way a Jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves. And she speculated that, in principle, such a machine might even work with things like music, if the relationships could be expressed mathematically. At the same time, Ada was careful not to oversell it. In her notes, she wrote, "The analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform." She understood the power of the system and its limits. The machine could follow analysis, it could execute instructions, but it had no intention, no independent initiative. The argument later became known as Lady Lovelace's objection. And even today, when we argue about artificial intelligence, the same question returns. Can a machine truly create, or is it only doing what we told it to do? Ada anticipated that debate nearly 2 centuries ago. While all of this was unfolding on paper, Ada's public life was moving in the opposite direction, towards something conventional. In 1835, when she was 19, she married William King. He was steady, socially secure, and far less explosive than her father. In 1838, he was made Earl of Lovelace, and Ada became the Countess of Lovelace. They had 3 children. There were estates to manage, dinners to attend, expectations to meet. And for a Victorian aristocratic woman, those expectations were loud. A woman could be accomplished, but being publicly serious about mathematics could still make you seem unfeminine or strange. So Ada did what many intellectual women had to do. She worked through letters, private study, and personal networks. She kept writing to Babbage. She kept studying mathematics. She kept thinking about a machine that existed mostly in drawings and partial pieces. Yet she treated it as real enough to reason through in detail. But Ada's talent didn't always stay within safe boundaries. In the late 1840s, she became deeply interested in horse racing and betting. To her it looked measurable, odds, conditions, probability. She believed there had to be a method, that somehow you could calculate your way into winning. So she began betting. The losses didn't match her expectations. She recalculated, adjusted, tried again. The debts grew anyway. At one point, the situation was serious enough that she turned to pawning Lovelace family diamonds to cover the debts. Around the same time, her health began to decline again. Ada had never been physically strong. Doctors treated her with blunt tools of Victorian medicine, often heavy medication, harsh procedures, and not much relief. But she kept thinking, she kept writing. The body was unreliable, the mind stayed active. In 1852, Ada Lovelace died in London at the age of 36. When she died, the analytical engine was still unfinished. Babbage continued refining the design, but the machine was never completed in their lifetimes. Ada's notes existed in print, but for years they were mostly absorbed quietly into history. Then the 20th century arrived, and real programmable machines finally appeared. Engineers and historians looked back, and in Ada's 1843 notes, they found something startlingly familiar. A clear description of how a machine could follow a structured sequence of instructions, not just one isolated calculation. That's when the label first programmer really stuck. Not because she built a computer, but because she understood what one would need to do once such machine existed. And that context matters. In Ada's time, women were pushed to the edges of scientific life. Even the rare women who did serious work often had to publish cautiously, rely on private networks, or be treated as an exception instead of equals. Ada had enormous privilege, money, tutors, connections, but she still had to insist on being taken seriously. Her education depended on private access rather than public institutions. So Ada's legacy isn't just a first. It's also a proof that intellectual authority never belonged to only one gender. And it circles back to her central theme, poetical science. To write an algorithm for a machine that didn't exist, she had to hold two worlds together: the rational precision of her mother and the imaginative range she inherited from her father. Like 0 and 1, programming, at its core, is still that act of translation, turning abstract ideas into formal instructions a machine can follow. 2 centuries later, we are still practicing poetical science. This was Nastya from JetBrains Research. Goodbye.